All right, we're live. I'm gonna hit the transition button.
Me.
Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango,
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
and today we're gonna find out if we know how they live in Tok-y-o. But before we do that, buddy, I want to show the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast.
On this podcast, we talk about games, and we've been talking a lot about games recently. So I guess it's time to go off on wild tangents again. And we're on our third Fast and Furious movie franchise review, right? The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, right? Probably the most memed on Fast and Furious movie. I feel like Tokyo Drift has this like memey sort of center in like pop culture consciousness, but also the title alone of Too Fast, Too Furious just being funny on its face is maybe makes it the most memed on Fast and Furious movie.
Well, I think Tokyo Drift is sorry, my headset is dying, so I have to go plug it in. But I think the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift is like more recognizable. I think it might actually be like more watched, and the song's super recognizable. Like I'm gonna say right now that of the three movies we've watched so far, Tokyo Drift is by far the best of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah. I guess I was also gonna say, like, is there a bigger gap between the Tokyo Drift and the other movies? Because it felt like it felt like when they went with Fast and Furious, it felt like, at least at the time, I remember feeling like it's like, oh, they're doing another one of those. I thought like, Tokyo Drift was kind of the end of it. But it's only 3 years after it's the same distance between that and Fast and Furious as Too Fast, Too Furious is from Tokyo Drift. So
yeah, so the story of the Fast and the Furious franchise is very like weird in this way. The Tokyo Drift was actually sort of envisioned as a almost like kind of like an episodic side story, right? Like at the time it was this understanding that, okay, well, we can market the name Fast and Furious as a street racing car movie. It doesn't necessarily have to tie in with like the lore or like the overall world building, right? So they hired Justin Lin. They also hired the writer whose name I don't remember, but Justin Lin is obviously the key guy who gets brought in at this stage to turn the Fast and Furious franchise into what it would eventually become. And they sort of force on Justin Lin in a funny way. They sort of force him at the very, very end of the movie to have a connector piece, right? With where Dom Toretto, Vin Diesel shows up and he asks about Han because Han used to run in his crew, right? Like there's this cryptic line in the beginning where Han says, those Western movies, right? Those cowboy movies that race into the border. Well, this is my Mexico, right? And the implication is that before now he has run with, like he has been part of the Dominic Toretto street racing vehicle theft crew, right? And that's cool, and that's great or whatever. But it is weird that Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift is at once so far removed from what the Fast and the Furious movies are about, right? Very little world building happens here in the way that we've talked about in some of these previous movies, right? Like, the friendship between Roman and Brian O'Connor getting kind of set up, even just like aspects of Brian's character and Roman's character in the previous movie, right? Aspects of their interaction with law enforcement, right? That come from the previous movie with, the undercover Ava, whatever her name is, Ava Mendez's character. All of the pieces of the world building that come from the very first one, right? The Coronas, the family barbecue. I like listed all of this stuff off, right? Like the house in the hills overlooking Los Angeles, all that stuff is like iconic and set in stone. There really isn't anything along those sorts of lines from Tokyo Drift, right?
There is one thing in that Dominic says that Han was family, and that's basically it.
Not true. which is probably the first time he ever said that, actually, because I don't think he says family or he refers to them as a family in the first one, and he's only been in this one and the first one so far.
Yeah, I don't know if he actually says Han was family in the movie. Like, the unnamed British sounding Asian guy says to what's the main character's name? The actor is Lucas Black. Um,
God, I don't remember what his name is.
the new DK,
Sean.
Sean. Yeah, yes, you're right. So he's the British Asian guy says to Sean that this guy says that Han was family. Um, and so that's just like part of the texture, I guess, of the. But it's said in a way like he must have said it beforehand because it's said in a way that like this would tip a viewer off to that this is Dominic, right? Like
Mm.
like it's said in the way that like the kind of like wink and nudge at the audience, right? Like so like it's at least established as a theme. Um, but
But the thing that I think is interesting about this, sorry, like
go
my
for it, go
overall
for it.
point about this is it reminds me of our talk when we talk about Star Wars: The Last Jedi, and this question comes up of what does it mean to be a Star Wars movie, right? Is it kind of the iconography? Is it something on a thematic level? Is it the vibes, right? Um, and I feel like Tokyo Drift doesn't have anything to do with Fast and the Furious except for vibes, but it has such hardcore Fast and Furious vibes that it feels truer to the Fast and Furious franchise than the first and second one will, right? Like when we get later down the line, we're gonna get to like Fast Five, Fast Six, and you're gonna be like, oh my god, Tokyo Drift is more Fast and Furious than the first Fast and Furious movie is Fast and Furious, which I think is hilarious and weird and funny. And I have no idea how to like really talk about that besides the fact that it's just like it just operates on a level of raw vibes.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Just kind of in that vein, I saw I almost said that I thought this movie was like so. I had heard before that like this movie in the timeline takes place between what like 5 and 6 or something like that.
6 and 7.
6 and 7. Okay. And people made comments about like the cell phones not being right. And I was like, okay, whatever, beforehand, right? Like that's like but like there's so much focus on the cell phones in this movie, right? Like that's like, oh, like that really is like kind of a problem, right? They keep zooming in on these flip cell phones. And like it's like a very kind of like era appropriate technology. So it's I guess it's a bigger deal than they made it. But I will say, like I said before, that I think this is the best of the three movies so far. Um by leaps and bounds. I liked a lot of little things. Like one of my favorite things in this movie is that they establish in that opening race in like America that our main character Sean is terrible at cornering, right? Like
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, like it is. It's not even like he's like he is. Like it is weird. Maybe weird's not the right word, but like him drifting is strange because like he's not even like normal good at cornering. He is absolutely terrible at cornering, right? Like he just like literally muscles through corners and like tries to make up for it in raw speed in that first race. So that's some good storytelling, I think.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, it's crazy this happens in the third movie, right? Because the first two just take it for granted, right? Like their skill as racers is fundamentally established, right? And there's little things, right? Obviously, Dom has his muscle car. He's like Dominic is defined by muscle cars, whereas Brian is defined by like Japanese imports, right? And so the typical dynamic is that like Dom sort of has this like speed and acceleration and muscle car, just like horsepower energy. Whereas Brian is doing the crazy, Brian is doing like the crazy shit, right? This is not super real. It's not like I don't know that how much they actually think about this, but I do think it kind of comes through, right? Where like there is a certain amount that you are meant to sort of interpret about or like infer about their abilities, as racers, based on the kinds of cars that they drive and the kind of racing that they do. But this is the movie that makes that stuff really explicit because yeah, he is garbage at cornering and it is a real skill that he needs to learn over the course of the movie, which gives it a very straightforward kind of like hero's journey plot structure, right? Where he's got to take the time and like it's funny to me, it's hilarious to me the reverence with which they talk about drifting, right? Like going up into the mountains, and Han is like, "Oh, like this is where they first learned to drift." Or like he's talking to the girl later, and she's like, "Even before we had cars, we would just watch people drift through these mountains." And it's like she's describing like going to the pond of fireflies where she had her first kiss. And it's like, but
Yeah.
it's talking about Japanese street racing, right?
Even the fishermen on the dock were like, you call that drifting?
Yeah.
Is it like the old Japanese men that go fishing, or like, it's like that culturally saturated that like old Japanese men on the pier have opinions.
And it's just like, and I think that there's something like inherently funny about it, that absurdity, but also, and this is probably it, right? I'm talking about vibes. I'm talking about why this movie has the right vibes for a Fast and Furious movie. It's because these Fast and Furious movies are so achingly, heart-wrenchingly sincere, right? Nothing is ever like, it is always played so fucking straight and so earnestly, and it wants you to care so goddamn much about street racing, right? And I think that's why, Tokyo Drift actually does sort of just feel like a Fast and Furious movie, and even some of these later ones, is just because of how reverential everyone is over the kind of art of racing itself. It is not just cool, but it is awe-inspiring. It's almost like a religious thing, right? Which I think is fun and hilarious.
Yeah, no, I think it's I think it's a super fun movie. I think I enjoyed it. Like I said, I like it was just like a fun watch, right? Like you said,
Mhm.
like we've been talking about this a little bit with like like our last episode about Superman, right? Like I think sincerity is kind of like the pendulum is swinging back towards that in kind of the superhero era. And I think the Fast and Furious franchise is effectively a very sincere superhero movie series, and so it's
Yeah.
well positioned to kind of like take over that niche. So yes, I definitely agree. Um, I also didn't realize like how much like this feels like the kind of like starter point for a lot of people's entry into like Japanese culture, right? Like I feel like this
Sure.
movie like birthed like 1,000 weebs in a lot of ways, right? Like things that like we consider normalish now in like 2020, right? Like I think like kind of get filtered through like this is like where like um you know the our kind of like understanding of Japan like gets like a foothold a lot in the culture, like in a way that I didn't realize, right? Because like obviously a lot of that comes through anime, but there's also a lot of kind of like there's a lot of like like I bet you a lot of people know the word gaijin because of this movie, which I did not realize, right? I basically got that through like like memes around anime, but like it's not like a word they say in anime because it's usually not gaijin in there, right? Like so yeah, I think it's like an interesting kind of like cultural touchstone from that perspective. Um,
Think that it is a very authentically Japanese movie, right? Like, not that this is the Tokyo that I grew up in, right? Like when I was living in Tokyo, like, I mean, obviously I was still living in Tokyo, but people don't really understand. Tokyo is fucking huge. Tokyo is gigantic, and so like it's kind of like the difference between. It's sort of like the difference between if you grow up in like Queens, in like Forest Hills, you're kind of growing up in the suburbs, right? Versus if you were to grow up in Manhattan, right, which is like a very, very sort of urban environment. Is a little bit like that. But anyway, but it is so authentically Japanese in so many of these like just like little details, right? Like the size of his dad's apartment, right? And the way in which like that's like this very kind of like um sort of hunched claustrophobic space. Like that's a really authentically Japanese thing, right? Or the school, right? The way that the school doesn't feature super heavily, right? But just like the interactions that he's having around the school, taking off his shoes, that kind of thing is all like very authentically Japanese. And I feel like that is something that gets missed a lot in certain of these other sorts of movies where it's like basically it's set in Japan, but sort of a nondescript Japan. Does that make sense? Like, so for
yeah,
instance, Avengers Endgame reminds me of this. There's this whole bit where Hawkeye is in Japan for that movie, but it's really just kind of like using like a little bit of the iconography, and it's not really like authentic, right? Or even you're like even movies that are more heavily set in Japan than that. What is the Pacific Rim sequel called? Pacific Rim Uprising. You know, like half of that movie takes place in Japan, but it doesn't feel like it's not like that. It feels like it's authentically Tokyo, or it's trying to capture something authentic about what it is like to be, a kid growing up in the streets of Tokyo. So it sort of like misses the mark on that level. And I feel like the translation is there in Tokyo Drift, which is part of, you know, I don't know, part of what makes it work, and part of why it fueled so many weeps.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. Uh, Something I actually was curious about, and I don't know if you know this, but is it true that like the Tokyo police can't go over 180 kilometers per hour?
I don't know actually offhand. I mean, certain aspects of that seem true to me, in the sense of like Tokyo police are, I don't know, Tokyo is like a very not crime ridden place. And so like you wouldn't expect a big police chase to happen in Tokyo in the same way that you would in the United States, I guess is what I would say. Just because I don't know. I mean, I think some people would say that Japan has less crime, but I also understand that Tokyo and Japan has a history of sort of underreporting crime in order to appeal that way. It was like a big controversy however many years ago where the police were essentially throwing out legitimate cases because they didn't want to make it look like there was lots of crime happening. Um and how that's sort of like a cultural problem inside of Japan. So I don't know. That's like a whole other thing.
Okay, yeah, so I googled this, and apparently that used to be kind of true, and part of that was because at some point, like one of these racing clubs had a gentleman's agreement with the police that like they would be like safe, but go fast, right? And so since they had such high standards, the police would kind of look the other way, but that kind of fell apart right around the time of this, or like a couple of years before this movie happened. So uh, I don't know how true that is. That's what it says on Quora, which is as trustworthy as anything else you find on the internet. Um, but I thought that was like an interesting idea that like it felt like such like a specific thing to put in a movie, like to put in the movie to just like have, and it's not like it's like a plot point, right? It's not like it's like a Chekhov's gun, right? Like it's just kind
Mhm.
of like an excuse for why they can speed, like why he can speed in that one scene, right? Like because like all the races are like inside parking structures where it's like the emphasis is really on drift or on the mountain, where the emphasis is less on raw speed and more on like technical drifting ability. Um, and so it's not really a particularly useful. So it felt like a thing that like had to be true in some regard in order for it to like um in order for it to be mentioned. Uh, yeah. But yeah. What else do you want to say about this movie?
What else? So it was interesting to me, re-watching it and thinking about the way it sort of like so okay, something I've talked about in the past is that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Humans are naturally progressive. We get better at this stuff over time. This is a Star Wars movie in a certain sense. It is a Star Wars movie that tells that Star Wars plot structure, I think, better than Star Wars does in on a writing level, right? In the sense of Han as a mentor, right, and Sean as kind of the impetuous like apprentice. But I also kind of forgot that the actor who plays Sean sort of sucks. Actually, I kind of think everybody sucks in this movie except for two people. Number one is the one Asian guy that is part of DK's crew who has like the bleached hair, who I think is gay, like he's like the gay street racer, but I don't know. I just love it when he's on screen. He does this, he just does like fun things that are hilarious to me. Like there's this part where like he and Sean are arguing and he just like blows Sean a kiss. And then Sean beats him in a race and he like freaks out at his steering wheel. And I'm just like, yep, I don't know why. That stuff like connects with me. And then Han. Han is like the main character Like he is the guy that makes that holds Tokyo Drift on his back. He is so effortlessly cool and just like good and like funny. He's just everything, right? Like I feel like the whole movie is just carried on the back of this one character and the actor who, and the actor who plays him. And I don't know. Did you have a similar reaction to Don?
Yep. I mean, I think that like I thought Han was a great character. And I thought he was interesting, right? Like I don't think his acting chops are there, but I also think that like a lot of the plot of this movie doesn't make a lot of sense. Which is fine, right? Like it's about racing, right? Like, everything is like if you've ever seen a Pokemon movie, like the way you solve 90% of the problems in a Pokemon movie is Pikachu uses Thunderbolt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, my favorite example of this is like there are people that are they're hungry, right? And I remember this is like the first time I heard this, right? So I'm like 9, and like my friend's like, look, Pikachu's gonna solve this with Thunderbolt. And literally come across a depowered like hot dog vending machine, and Pikachu uses Thunderbolt, right? I feel like this is like the thing in this movie. It's like the solution is always racing, right? It's like this Yakuza mob boss is mad at me. Solution: racing, right? Like in like a way that like nope. Sean's dad wanted to send him out of the country. And the offer is like, no, I have to take care of this. And he takes care of this by offer to race. And if he loses, leave the country. So it's like kind of like, there's not
my favorite example of this is actually the very beginning of the movie where he gets into this fight with the jock, right? And the jock throws the baseball through the back of his and you can tell that it's like a powerful like muscle car or whatever, but it like looks rickety compared to this guy's like pristine Dodge Viper. And so the jock throws the baseball through the back window, and then Sean gets out and he's like, let's settle this by racing. And then the jock makes the very reasonable point of, my car is worth 80 grand. So your car is worth nothing.
He doesn't say that though. He pulls out a wrench and it's really like beat his head in. And the girl says, settle it with racing. And
yeah, and then the jock says, well, no, I'm not going to do this because my car is worth so much more than your car. There's no reason for me to put that up, essentially.
Because he says he only races for pink slips, right?
And then she says, and she is his girlfriend. She says, why don't you race for me? And somehow that convinces him because she's already his girlfriend. He already, you know what I mean? Like, why is he risking this? How is that convincing?
And then in the middle of the race, she gets mad at him. He's like, I thought you loved me.
And I'm just like, none of this makes any sense. And is so dumb and stupid.
On top of that, like, he blows through a house and causes massive damage. And apparently the cops are like, we won't charge you if you send your son to Tokyo? Right? Like,
yeah. Sean is a flight risk. My guy, they fucking got him out of the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a fun, like, it's not presented like he was running from the law. It's presented as like the solution to this problem that is acceptable to the police is they ship him off to Tokyo, right? Like,
I also just, the mechanics of that race bother me for a couple of, like, there's a certain amount to the racing that I am willing to sort of suspend my disbelief over, right? We will get to some of this a little bit later down the line as the movies get a little bit more outlandish. But the one that destroys me in this movie, I actually like all of the races. I think everything that happens in Tokyo is actually really great. And it like works in a way, like it feels kind of natural and sort of like endemic to this world or whatever. But that first race kind of makes no fucking sense. I'm sorry, Orion, are you coming down? That first race kind of makes no fucking sense. Sean is behind for most of the race. And then there's this like pickup truck, and you understand that these are two souped up street racing cars that are going insanely fast, but the pickup truck is also going that fast, and it's a pickup truck full of people who are just like hanging out in like the bed of it. But like, okay, I guess maybe you could make an argument that the jock is like trying to, not allow Sean to move in or whatever, and so he's intentionally sort of like keeping the race like slow, right? But then there are these pieces where Sean starts driving off road, and you think that that's actually like like maybe that's a way that he's going to sort of win, is because he's going to be able to break away in the off-road section, right? Rather than like be stuck behind the bumper of the Viper the whole time. But then he pops out of the off-road sections and he's still behind the Viper. And it's like, well, why didn't you just drive on the fucking road, dude? Why did you take this like dumb turn and then blow your whole car through like the foundations of this house, right? Um and then he just sort of kind of effortlessly gets ahead, and the guy whose whole thing is his car is really valuable starts smashing into Sean's car. And it's just like all of these things kind of compound to make me go like, who the fuck thought of this like race as an action scene? It doesn't make any sense.
Not only that, but just kind of like, on its terms, it's like being like what you would suppose would be like a fair race for anybody to like, call it legitimate or whatever. Like in the eyes of the contestants, right? One, the pickup truck is blocking the people that they're the opponent of the people they're ostensibly friends with, right? Which doesn't seem like it's fair dealing, right? And also, like on the other side, one of Sean's off-road jaunts is a shortcut. It's like literally he's not running the course and he's going a short distance, which feels like a violation of terms, right? Like, also this seems like an enormous subdivision under construction, right? For them to be going this long in, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, famously, anything in Fast and Furious is like insanely long, because if they are going as fast as they are going to try like the climactic in the first movie, right? Like this big climactic DVD heist of the truck. Vince is hanging off the truck. He's like tied to it by this cord or whatever. That takes place over like 50 miles, because we're assuming that these cars are going insanely fast, right? And it takes forever. The whole thing takes however many minutes to to play out in full. And so it's like, oh yeah, well actually, like there is 20 miles of highway where no other cars exist at all, like whatsoever, in like the middle of the California desert, right? Or there's like the famous one, obviously, is the Fast and Furious 6 runway thing, where there's the climax of that movie takes place with a plane that's like about to take off, and the runway for that plane would have to be like 25 miles long in order to, because the whole whatever half hour of climax is taking place while they're driving cars up behind it. That stuff, in a weird way, I can deal with that stuff better, because it is so outlandish that it is sort of easier to accept. Like it's kind of how, like, if I'm watching Bugs Bunny, because it is more comedy than Young Justice, right? I can kind of accept the cartoon physics of that world. Or like, actually, a better version of this might be Teen Titans Go and the original Teen Titans, right? The original Teen Titans has like a little bit more like serious a tone, and so because it is closer to reality, I have less suspension of disbelief for it. Whereas because Teen Titans Go goes very far into unreality, I'm just really willing to suspend my disbelief all the way, all the way out, basically. That's sort of what's happening with these Fast and Furious movies. Is, Tokyo Drift is not an especially realistic movie, but the whole rest of the movie is played so kind of authentically and true to form that the front half really, or the front race really, stands out to me as this kind of thing that does not make a lot of sense when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and just to go back to for a second to the point that like this is kind of like, racing solves everything. Drifting is so important. Like, it feels like this movie like puts like racing in like it's like a totalizing thing, right? Like, the only other movie that feels like this to me is like Speed Racer, where it's like racing is like so entirely totalizing. It's like he goes to Japan. His dad's like, I better not hear about you racing, right? Immediately violates that. And when he comes home, his dad's like, have you been racing? As if like, he was like doing a crack or something, right? Like the same level of like, he's like, God damn, you've gotten into the cars again. No, my boy. Also like, it's like, you can't do that. Like, literally no consequences for him, like totally ignoring his fault. Like, he's like, The next day, he goes back to school and it's like, Dad, I've got extracurriculars, and his dad doesn't like bat an eyelid or anything, right?
Oh yeah, Dad, I'm going to the Slow Walkers Club. I'm going to the Street Racers Police Union headquarters to catch street racers. Come on, like it's just
Yeah, no, like I thought that they were gonna play it. It's gonna be like he's gonna be like, I've got this delivery job now. I know you said you didn't want me around cars, but lets me drive cars, and it's me being responsible and getting money. And he just leaves out the part where he's like driving super fast and driving like drug deliveries or whatever or shady Yakuza deliveries, yeah. Right? No, just kind of like, he does that, and like the movie progresses, and eventually they show that he's not living at home anymore, right? Like that's how they solve that. The only thing they do is they set up a Chekhov's gun with his dad having a car, right? Which also, right? Like if your son comes to you and you're afraid that he's gonna get hurt and you want to send him out of the country, he's like, one, I need to fix this. It's like, okay, maybe I believe that. But then he comes back to me, he's like, I need to take your car to street race the nephew of a Yakuza to like win back my honor. He's like, okay, son, here's the keys. Like
Not to mention the part where like he comes and he sees the dad working on the car, and they kind of have this like nice father son bonding moment. I just couldn't help but think that like if your son has this like problem with street racing, right? Like he is addicted to street racing, and that is bad. Wouldn't it be bad for you to like sit there? It's like if my son is a fucking heroin junkie, and then he comes to me one Saturday afternoon as I'm polishing my syringe collection, and he's like, oh, are these vintage syringes? Wow, they're beautiful. It's like, no, why would you show him that?
Yeah,
and my crack pipe collection.
Or like in the other direction, right? Like maybe you could channel this into something healthy, and you like approach, like you introduce it. It's like, oh, we can work on this car together. So it's like, no, it's just like he just happens to walk up while he's working. It's like, oh, you never mentioned you had a car. It's like, nope, found it on the base, and that's the only thing I'm going to tell you about this.
Yeah, it is also like I do want to give the movie some credit, right? Planting and payoff is good. Yeah. It is nice to see that executed, right? It is echoing a similar moment in the very first Fast and Furious, right? Dom is working on that muscle car, and the very final race that he does with Brian, like the iconic one where he's in that Dodge Charger. This would become Dom's signature vehicle with that big, giant, whatever that V8 intake thing on the thing is, and he does the wheelie up front because that car has just like such insane horsepower. That's cool. That's like a fun kind of piece of connective tissue. But I do not, in a million fucking years, believe that an American muscle car you built with your dad is going to be a better drift car than DK's specially designed Japanese drift car. Like,
no, well, he put a Nissan engine in it, so that means it's
that makes it all work. It's like at the very the other thing about the beginning of the movie that I think is hilarious is the car crash Sean gets into, right, where he flips like 80 times and just walks away from with like his teeth are bloody and he has like a little cut on his forehead or whatever. It's like, that is an insane car wreck to just kind of be like, oh yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, I mean, and again, these aren't really criticisms. I don't care all that much about any of that. It's just like funny to think about and talk about, right? Like, yeah. What else? There's less NOS in this movie. Although it features pretty prominently, it's like less. I mean, I guess because they're doing less speed, but like there's like they've got like the bike with like the two cans like sitting on like the on the thing, but like and it like shows up, but it's not like as important.
Yeah, I do like that it is it is not a given. It is sort of like a special feature, sort of where not every race is about, like, it feels like in the first movie and the second movie it's about like, do you use your NOS correctly, right? Brian loses his first race to Dom because he doesn't he blows his nos first, and Dom says, like, too soon or whatever. Um, and that's neat. That's cool. I think the nos is a neat detail. But it is better when it is less prominent. And it will eventually, I mean, I don't know, is this spoilers? It will eventually fall away from the franchise entirely, where it basically they don't even have Nos or use Nos anymore.
Yeah, I feel like that's like a sponsorship thing, right? Like this is like Nas paid for placement in this car movie rather than like
Oh, I never even thought of that.
really.
That actually kind of makes Yeah, that actually kind of makes sense. I guess you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, that felt very clear to me that like this is like a product placement, like especially in this third movie where it really doesn't have a spot to do anything other than just like be there to be like a thing that they point out. Um, but in that kind of light, I really appreciate this movie in being drift themed is a lot like it. Even though like you said, like I don't necessarily believe that like this muscle car can drift as well as the Japanese car, it at least makes it seem more skillful, right? Like most of the racy parts, like races in the first two movies, are like straightaways, and it feels like maybe there's some skill there, but it's not like apparent, right? It's like you drive like it feels like it's very reliant on the equipment, and you just drive straight in line, and like like you said, maybe there's some skill to like when you activate the NOS, but it doesn't feel like it only feels like it matters because the movie says it does rather than like being visible, right? Like in this movie,
Yeah, and it's not like I get the sense that there's these decisions being
yeah,
made that make these racers so much better than the other ones, right? Whereas you can tell that there are decisions being made in Tokyo Drift that are the hallmarks of a good racer. Actually, this is not entirely true. I actually do think that this does show up in Too Fast, Too Furious, and I like that it does. For instance, Brian winning the race that they should lose because he plays chicken with the other car, right? As the thing that he does to get to catch up and eventually get an advantage in order to like win this other car, right? Like that's cool, right? Like that is a fun and interesting and neat decision that gets made. And there's also some other stuff in that movie about like the way the stakes are playing out that also influence this, right? Where you have the little laser, it's a completely crazy sci-fi thing. It's like a fucking spear gun that like shuts off the car, right? Like having to deal with that stuff introduces these sort of like decision making moments, whereas in the very first movie there are basically no decision making moments, and also the physics of the race don't make any sense because like you just sort of expect in a straightaway that you go to your fastest speed as soon as possible, right? And so it seems weird, I guess, to me that like there is even room for, like for any of this stuff. It's not like they ever walk you through the process of, oh well, I have such and such a transmission, which means that I can skip gears, right? Maybe I go from first to third, right? Or I have a sixth gear, right? So that when I'm going super super fast on one of these straightaways, I can really punch it and go. Like these are technical details that a real car could have to have an advantage, but like we never deal with any of that stuff.
right, yeah, yeah. And to the series credit, right? Like a lot of that is dealt with like by making the races not actually the focus. Like there are very few impactful races for a series that is based around racing, right? Like that's why I said like the racy parts, right? Like like
Yeah.
race wars and the initial drag race are like this in the first movie, but like the actual impactful driving scene is the heist, and that has
Mhm.
technical elements to it. But
Yeah,
that's all.
or like Brian getting away from the cops, right? And
Yeah,
picking up Dom and escaping from the cops by driving through this super thin alley, right? Like that stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And I think the same is mostly true for the second movie. But that's why I say I like it better. Like I like this movie bases it around like an actual race, right? Like I said, the first two movies, it's not actually about a race. It's about like a plot thing that happens to have fast moving cars in it, right? For the most part. Whereas this movie is actually about a race, several of them, but like it's a race that happens on a race's turn and is interesting because it's got like interesting race mechanics. It's about drifting. It's rather than about like like straightaway speed. So, um, I don't know how much that carries forward. It looks like they're very like superhero movie-y. Um, But yeah,
You know, it kind of carries forward more than you might think. But I don't know. We'll get there.
yeah.
The
So
other interesting thing
I just want,
is the way. Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
yeah, just a quick question. Like, do these characters show back up post seven? Like, I saw, like, I googled Lucas Black just because like I didn't know who the actor was, and like said that he's like, it says Fast and Furious X, but I didn't look too close because I didn't want to spoil myself on anything. If it's a spoiler, then don't tell me.
Uh, I guess it is not a spoiler to say that yes, these characters show back up in
Yeah.
in the franchise in the future.
Okay. Like I assume Han shows up at some point. I assume that's like what
Oh
establishes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, so the thing that makes it Han is in the next 3 movies, right? He's in Fast and Furious 4, 5, and
Oh
6.
really? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that.
Not necessarily as a main character, but just like the reason that the reason that we know the timeline is Tokyo Drift happens after 6 and before 7, right? Is because Han is an established member of Dom's crew in 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
With like and you know we'll talk about this stuff as we get there, but the thing that makes Han interesting to me in Tokyo Drift is he is sort of he's sort of the Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow, right? Just sort of the guy who sort of is the glue to the whole thing. And um just he's just like a great character. He has these great lines, owning 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing, right? Or, he has this line about character, right? Which, to be fair, sort of answers a lampshade question, which is why the fuck did Han just give this kid his car and then let him wreck it, right? And it's because because he wanted to test Sean's character, right? And Sean would eventually go on and do things that are legitimately impressive to Han, which is a detail that I remember I didn't think about or appreciate my first time watching it, but the second time it really rang true to me. Like, right, like there's the part where he goes to the bathhouse and he has to essentially get money back from like the sumo wrestler, and he gets thrown out of the bathhouse, right? But Sean just gets back up and he walks back in, right? And that's the moment, like, and it's stuff like that, right? Where it's like, this is what Han sees in Sean that makes him be like, oh, this is a guy who is special, right? Like this is the guy who is worthy of kind of my mentoring, and and this level of special attention that I'm giving to him. Also, it's just iconic that he's constantly eating snacks. I don't know why, but it's just such a great, it's like a great thing. He's just always got a bag of chips. Like
Makes sense. Yeah. 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 But I think I interrupted you, and you were gonna say something when I asked about the future characters. Did you remember what you were gonna go on about?
no. Well, I don't want to be any more specific than yes, they do,
Right.
come back into the
Right.
franchise.
But you were in the middle of you were about to say something when I asked you that question if they were gonna
Oh,
come
I'm
back.
sorry. Oh shit. What was I about to say? Fuck.
I don't know. That's why I was asking. Uh,
I don't remember.
all right. Well, other thoughts about the movie then, I guess. This because like it feels like a very simple movie, like structure wise, like and it works, but like it feels like there's not like a ton to dig into. With
So the other thing that I want to call out is the CGI and the stunts, which are mostly done by real cars here, which feels good, right?
yeah,
There is there's a couple of moments of kind of like light CGI, one of which I actually really love and I think is maybe like the best use. I've alluded to this before. The CGI versus realness of the cars is a hot button issue in the Fast and Furious fan base. Like, people really don't like some of the movies because they only feature like CGI cars basically. And the return of real stunt work being done in the movies was like a big thing that kind of happened. We'll talk about this when that shows up sort of in these later films. But there's this moment where DK is drifting in that first race where he's really owning the shit out of Sean, where it shows how close his bumper gets to the wall. And that moment is really sweet and really slick. And it's just like, yes, Justin Lin gets this shit, right? It's not the CGI fly into the engine, which is fine, but it's like kind of ultimately like sort of worthless, right? Like what does that really show us? Why is that particularly like noteworthy? It's kind of just a little bit cool on a just like you know, if I were to go to the R mechanical gifts subreddit, that stuff is cool level, but like it doesn't actually show us anything. Whereas with this moment, it's like, yeah, dude, this guy is named DK because he is the drift king and like he's really good at this, which I was like, yes, this is my shit. But but I like that the one, they're not they're playing for keeps with these cars. Like they're wrecking the shit out of these cars, right? Like not only is Sean bad at drifting and completely demolishes the first car that he gets from Han, right? But also the stuff in in the beginning, right? Like the some of the stuff later on down the line. Obviously, there's like the fiery car crash that kills Han, you know, at the end of the second act, and it's just like they are playing for keeps with these cars, which I really appreciate. And I remember, you know, one of the first things that somebody ever said to me about Tokyo Drift was how they liked Tokyo Drift because somebody ran a red light and they fucking died. Like they ran a red light, they got plowed by another car and they died for it. And I was like, fuck, yeah, you're right. That's true. Like there's something to the just like the ambient danger of it all, right? That comes across in Tokyo Drift in a way that that doesn't in the previous movies because we're using real cars. Those real cars are getting into crashes, and those crashes have consequences for the characters.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like some of the that you know, run the red light aspect is undercut by like immediately beforehand them like drifting through a crowd of people that happens to part, and so they don't hit anybody. Like that felt like wrong, but you know what, you know. But I think I take the I take the point. I think it makes sense. Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely agree that like the realism definitely made it feel better. Although I do want to say that that like close cut thing, like again, this is nitpicky and not really a problem. But like I saw, I was like, that's not impressive. That just means he like didn't make the turn as tight as he could have, right? Because if he made the turn tighter, it would have been less of a problem, right? Because it's the back wall, right? Like
Oh, I see. Like you would, if the way to do it would be to show the front wall, right? Like you
yes,
are drifting around a corner, like a pillar or something like that, right? And you just hair miss it, right?
right, exactly, right? Because like that's a tighter turn, right? And like there's no advantage to like being closer to the back wall, right? Like at least as far as I can tell. And you could maybe set up a situation where like, you know, like the thing that I thought was super impressive, which it looked like real, was like drifting all the way up the turny part, right? Like that was super sick, right? Like that felt like that felt like both skillful and useful in terms of the race mechanics, right? Like so.
And the way that I also like the way that they drift in a like convoy, right? Like there's the part where he's driving with the girl, the Australian girl, and they're drifting through the mountains, and they're part of this big, you know, like team of people who are all drifting in unison. And it's like it's almost like it was like synchronized swimming or something, you know, like
Yeah.
there was like a dance or like a grace to it that is kind of impressive and that I liked a lot.
Yeah, I mean that also felt like it was part of like this like weird magical realism aspect where like everyone in
Yeah.
Tokyo cares about like racing, right? Um, like the only way it could have been like more on the nose if they were drifting down Mount Fuji, right? Like,
With cherry blossom petals drifting down. My god, that's funny. That's That's funny. Well, I'm glad to hear that you actually like this one because people say it's the fucking worst one, and I hate them for it. They are dumb idiots because it is great, and I love
yeah,
it.
like it's the least like kind of like connected of them, but it's definitely not like it is definitely better than the previous two. And like I think basically in every way that isn't like, you know, world building and character development, right? Like
Yeah, like I think that's really what people say Tokyo Drift is bad because like I said, everybody except for fucking Han is kind of a bad actor in this movie. Like nobody like I I I care a little bit about Sean, right? Like, I care the minimum amount about Sean, but I care much more about Brian O'Connor and Dominic Toretto because, like, these guys have real chemistry in the first one, right? Or even just like Brian and Roman in the second one, right? Like, they have real chemistry. Even just a bit character like Tej in the second one has all of this extra kind of life and texture to him that I like much more than basically anybody in Tokyo Drift except for these two guys that I mentioned, the blonde haired guy and Han. And I feel like when people are complaining about Tokyo Drift, they're kind of complaining on that level, and I'm not gonna quibble.
Yeah.
But just on every other level, it's so much better than the first two movies. Like, it's kind of insane.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Yeah. Did you have anything else you want to talk about this movie, or should we move on
No,
to our
I guess
weeks?
I guess we clipped it. Yeah, and we have a lot of stuff to talk about in the back half, right?
Yeah, or a bunch of different things. At least I have some. First thing I want to do is I'm going to leave frame for a second, but I was at Walmart earlier, and I got the Coca-Cola Zero Dream Edition. As Coke aficionados, I figured I'd do a live tasting, live react.
I have seen Coke Dream, but I've not seen Coke Zero Dream. I did not know that they
Yep.
made it with Coke Zero.
It's Dream World Limited Edition, and it is Dream. It says it's dream flavored. I don't know if I'm actually reversed on this or not, but bottoms up. I don't think I'm a fan of that.
You heard it here first, folks. Some derps talk about games. Do not endorse Coke Zero Dream World Edition.
Yeah, so I've had the like Stardust edition, and I've had like the Marshmallow edition. The Marshmallow edition, confusingly, is watermelon flavored. And yeah, right, because it's Marshmallow the artist, not like the flavor.
No, sure, but you would think that.
Yeah.
Well, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I like the Astral or Star edition. Tasted like cinnamony and like spice. Like, it tastes almost like Christmassy, and I like that. Didn't like Marshmallow. Don't like this. It tastes like some sort of fruity, like almost like maybe a cherryish flavor, but not like almost like in a menacing way. I don't know. not a fan of this, but so that's the live review of Coke Zero. Like I will say that this is not so bad that I won't drink the rest of them, because I got like a 10-pack of these mini cans, but like the Marshmallow one, I would not drink a second can of that. So there's your rating, but.
I've been getting all of my sodas out of Costco recently.
Okay, yeah.
And I hate it. I want to go back to getting the 6-packs, even though it's so much more expensive. Or not the 6-packs, the 12-packs, right? Like, what I used to do was I would go get 9 12-packs, and that would last like a month, right? But it meant that I could filter through a bunch of different flavors, right?
Yeah.
Which is mostly what I'm looking for. Like, a lot of the time I'm looking for that variety. But like, once I realized that it would be like half as much money to get twice as much, from the giant pallets at Costco, I was like, well, I should just get these giant fucking pallets, right? But obviously they only make the giant pallets. It's like Coke Zero, Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, Diet Dr. Pepper, right? Like, that's all the options you have if you're a diet soda drinker. And so yeah, I've just been living that bland, not like, because I always loved like the mango or like the, Coke Zero vanilla or whatever, right? Like, those were always my favorite.
So I will say that if you keep your eyes peeled on like store brochures, you can sometimes, like, if there's other things on sale, then I think that like BJ's or Costco's the best price. Although the price has gone up pretty significantly, I think due to inflation, right? Like, I remember, and obviously this might vary regionally, but like a couple of years ago it was going for like $12.50 for a 35-pack, and now it's going for like $17.50. But sometimes like the grocery stores will be like, buy 2 get 1 free, mix and match, and so that's an opportunity to put some variation in there if you want. Pro shopping tips for Coke fiends out there, Coca-Cola fiends, I guess I should specify. But, so yeah, Now that we're done with that. How was your week?
Oh boy, how is my week? Well, I have finally done it. I have finally beaten two campaigns so far in Total War Warhammer 3. I have beaten my Skaven campaign on Deathmaster Snickich Snickich. And I have beaten the Skarsnik Greenskins campaign by completing first the the short victory, then the long victory, then the ultimate victory, right? Which is defeating kind of the end game threat of like, I like the vampire counts spawning just a million armies and going to war with fucking everybody. Um I don't know why the late game of these strategy games always gets out of control and loses its luster. And I sort of don't know why or how to deal with that. And I sort of wonder if there's any strategy game that I would say like, oh, the late game of this strategy game. I feel like most strategy games are at their most fun in the early and mid game, right? Um, some with different contours, right? Like I was talking about how Stellaris has a really good mid-game experience, right? Where you've kind of defined your borders, you have your kind of core planets, but now you're just like ramping up your optimization engine and kind of like kicking that whole thing sort of like into gear, right? By contrast, I sort of think Total War has a really good early game. I think the first like 50 to 75 turns of any Total War game are really fun and engaging, right? This is like where, you're at war from a bunch of different sides. You probably only have one or maybe two armies. Money is really, like really precarious. You're not just swimming in gold, right? Like faster than you could ever sort of like spend it down, or at least like, you have to think about it and sort of and make like decisions about it in a way that is more like complex than you might otherwise be thinking about and making these sorts of decisions. Having premium units is actually kind of tougher to get. You have to make choices about like, oh well, what buildings am I going to build first in order to like unlock some of these higher tier units, right? Like their upkeep is really expensive. Am I willing to take on, this elite set of armored infantry, or would I rather get two units of cheaper infantry in its place, right? Like all of that stuff is kind of happening in like these Total War early games. But once you've sort of kind of set out and you've kind of crested into the mid game, you have a pretty solid set of territory that is well defended, right? You've built your garrison buildings and all of your stuff. If anything happens, you have an army nearby that you could kind of respond to that with, or you could raise an army without too much issue. That's where things kind of like start to sort of like come down. And then eventually you get into the late game where it's like, in the Snickage campaign, I had 70 settlements, you know, I had 24 provinces, many of which were completely capped in terms of how much like gold I was generating. I was pretty much able to generate armies on the fly, and I was just sort of like moving through everything without too much issue. And it's just like I wish there was a better way to make that experience kind of deeply compelling than just uh I spawn a million guys. Maybe I think part of it is that maybe I think I'm really good with Skaven. I think like Wood Elves are my favorite faction, but it's just like I'm really good at Skaven campaigns. I feel like I like Skaven a lot. Skaven are they're just very well suited to the kinds of, I don't know, the kinds of strategies that I end up employing. And because like when I think about some of my other campaigns, like when I think about that Skarsnik campaign, that one actually was more fun, and it had a lot to do with the contours of the differences between greenskins and Skaven, because greenskins have cheaper armies overall, so you can field more of them, but the units suck, right? Like if you take 20 units, if you take a stack of greenskins up against a stack of high elves, right? Assuming you both empires are in a pretty strong spot and you can kind of field whatever units you want, the high elves are going to kick the shit out of the greenskins every fucking time, right? Which actually sort of makes things interesting because you have more armies on the map and you can kind of cover more ground with them. One of the things that was neat about my Skarsnik campaign is I expanded insanely quickly, just because it didn't take all that long to boot up a second army and start pillaging, right? Also, the other thing about Skaven and Greenskins that's neat is that their economies are sack and loot based rather than sort of economic center based, right? Green skin settlements don't make a lot of money. Having a lot of settlements is not actually going to give you a like a ton of cash flow, but they have huge bonuses to sacking enemy cities, right? So if you walk up to a really high tier enemy city and you sack that thing, it's going to give you like 75,000 gold, right? But if you do that on the Empire, you're never going to get that much money, right? The Empire is a faction that is built to, you, or like dwarfs are a better example of this. You create a strong economic base in your home cities, and those are going to fuel most of your economy kind of moving forward, right? Like going forward. And maybe that has kind of like a piece to do with it. And when I start playing dwarfs or vampire counts, or just any of these slower, like less explosive gold generating factions, I'll probably think a little bit differently about this stuff. But yeah, like maybe it just has to do with with playing these Skaven. I am definitely in the ending paces of a lot of these other campaigns, but it's just a matter of like actually filling out the victory conditions, some of which are easy and some of which are hard. The Warriors of Chaos victory conditions are actually fucking insane, and I have no idea how I am going to complete that in anything less than another 150 turns. Even though these Warriors of Chaos, the Warriors of Chaos actually probably have the best single stack out of any army. Like Chosen are monsters. They are just monsters to field a unit of Chosen. They are going to like kick the shit out of everything else on the battlefield. But that expense means that you're kind of in the opposite field of Skaven, where you need a you have a lot of territory in order to field like 4 armies, and those armies are going to be able to like 1v3, and you're going to be able to get these insanely crazy heroic victories or whatever. But if you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're just leaving all of your cities out there to get sacked over and over and over again, which is not fun and not great. Anyway, that's my weekly Total War Warhammer 3 update. I'm sure I will play much more of it, and we'll talk much more of it in the not too distant future. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I was gonna say it feels like a lot of strategy games have this problem where like at a certain point you are like it's like what's gonna happen is a foregone conclusion, and you need to kind of like just like execute on that, and it feels kind of like a drag to kind of like get through all of that. Um, so yeah, I think that's like a kind of universal problem. The only solution I've ever seen to that is like playing multiplayer.
Yeah.
Um, and even then, sometimes you get into that position at which point you just kind of give up, and that's like at least a
Yeah,
short
because
term
like
for
one
that.
person is clearly better. Like
Yeah,
is just far and away. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think the end game scenarios are probably the correct way to do it. Like one of the things that's nice about the end game scenarios as they played out in my Warriors of Chaos campaign, which are I got the vampire end game scenario. the the vampires are right next to me, right? And they immediately declare war on you, and they're just like constantly fucking you up. And I think that is generating better, more interesting battles, right? Where I have 3 huge stacks of like vampire counts armies. They are besieging a settlement of mine, right? With like 40 units in it, and I'm just having this huge blowout 40 units versus 60 units city battle playing out like that feels great. But when it was with Snickage, so with Deathmaster Snickage, it was the Sentinels, the Black Period of Nagash, which is the Tomb Kings, right? Sort of in the Southlands, kind of their Africa. And my power base was in Cathay, which is all like halfway across the map from that. And it's just like when the end game scenario triggered, I was nowhere near there, right? And by the time I actually was getting armies there, because I did have to defeat, you have to defeat the faction, you have to capture the Black Pyramid of Nagash in order to put an end to um the end game scenario. They were already basically contained by the rest of the AI, right? Because when these end game scenarios spawn, they declare war at everybody like unconditionally. You cannot be at peace with them, right? And so that was just kind of like a less interesting, less sort of compelling version of events, because I I just wasn't close enough to actually be dealing with any of these armies kind of as they, like as they spawned. I never had to do the thing where, okay, I'm going to muster the majority of my forces to sort of beat back this onslaught and contain them and, shut them down so that they don't go crazy and spread vampire corruption all over the place. So, I don't know. Maybe that's something. The end game scenarios are definitely better than the old one, which was just an invasion of chaos that was mostly annoying more than anything else. And I am excited to see the implementation of newer, more interesting versions of endgame scenarios for other races in the future.
Very cool. Um, on my end, another thing I did is I watched the movie Barbarian, which is a horror film. Is I have seen a bunch of people being like, "Oh, you should watch this movie without reading anything about it," which is what I did. And it's interesting. It's not like got like a few interesting like twists and turns to it, but it felt mostly like empty calories to me. Like if you want to see something that's like kind of scary and fucked up, I say go see it. But like I also think it wants to like say some stuff. And I don't want to put too much spoilers out there, but like I feel like it wants to say something, but it doesn't end up saying like it doesn't end up saying anything interesting. It's just kind of like a horror movie that is spooky. So again, I don't want to spoil it too much, but that's my thoughts on it. Um, Another thing to go into very briefly is I mentioned that I was watching the Great British Bake Off with my girlfriend, and we finished the 5th season, but the 10th season has just started. And as of last weekend, when I watched it, there were like 2 episodes out, so we started watching that. And it's still delightful, still a lot of fun. Although it feels like they're starting to run out of things to do. Like the final challenge in the 2nd episode of this season was like bake a mask, and the mask has to be freestanding. And it's got like a lot of creative expression to it, but it's like feels like not like a kind of realistic thing to do. I also think it is interesting. Salute in the chat says biscuit mask. Yes, it is a mask made out of cookies. It's biscuit wing.
Okay.
Um, uh, but like, I feel like I feel like you might have some opinions on this too. But like, so the structure of the show is the first challenge is a signature, then there's a technical, and then there's a showstopper. The showstopper, this is what the biscuit mask was. It's like this like big all out thing. But the middle one, the technical challenge, is the only one the contestants don't get to prepare for ahead of time, and it's judged blind. And I often find myself being like, this technical challenge is like, it's nonsense, right? Like it's like it'll be like something that like, no one's heard of, but like 2 of them did, and they end up winning. It's like, well, yeah, of course they fucking won this because like, they knew like the first episode of this season was like a red velvet cake, and it's like 2 of the contestants were like, I've like one of them was like, this is the red velvet cake's the first thing I ever made, and the other one was like, I love red velvet cake, right? And they end up taking first and 2nd place. It's like this doesn't seem like, but then like, and also like the part of it is that like they don't give a ton of clear instructions on like what to do, right?
Sure.
Like in the 2nd episode, they had to make these like cookie bars, but one of the instructions was like feather the white chocolate, right? Like, and so 2 of the contestants just like didn't understand what that meant, and they made white chocolate feathers, and they looked cool, but like it wasn't the right thing, so they ended up coming in the bottom. And it's like this feels like a badly written like a rule system. Loose in the chat, make the batter, bake it in the oven, right? And like I get some of that, right? Like like you're supposed to like as a baker, you should know how long this like cake, this sponge is takes to like given that you're an experienced baker, you should be able to figure out how much that takes. That makes sense to me, right? But like one of the challenges from the 5th season, it was this particular type of pie, and it goes this particular type of pie dish, and the pie dish has like this big rim on it, and the pie is supposed to go all the way out to the edge. But like that's not a thing from being an experienced baker. That's just like a thing, right? Like that's just like a thing that like it's a binary thing where you know or you don't know the knowledge. And that feels like unfair to me. But like otherwise, I think it's a fun show. I finally understand like the appeal of reality shows, right? Like I've got the people I'm rooting for, and the people I think are like the thing that I am told is unique about the Great British Bake Off is like there's rarely a person that you like. People are rarely nasty, so there's rarely a person that you hate. There's maybe people that are less skillful than others. So, and I like baking, so I thought it was interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, Lou in chat says feathering is a fairly common baking term if you, at least if you watch the Bake Off. The other thing that like felt a little off to me is the two people that screwed it up were clear like people like one was like a Malaysian woman, one was like a Saudi Arabian dude. So it's like people who like clearly English isn't their first language, and so like the lack of knowledge here feels like much more unfair than usual. But yeah. Uh Yeah, so those were like the two big shows. Otherwise, what did I do this? I played more Rumbleverse. Still super fun. I also played the Call of Duty beta, which feels like Call of Duty. I might buy that game just because sometimes I just like to sit down and shoot people with a Call of Duty gun and play the Call of Duty gameplay and do the Call of Duty thing. It is very Call of Duty. Um, I don't know. I don't have deeper thoughts than that.
What Call of Duty are we on right now?
So
I guess I can check.
no, don't. So we are on Modern Warfare 2. This is at least the second Modern Warfare 2, because Modern Warfare 2 came out when we were in in college.
That was like 2007, 2008.
Yeah. So that this is a new Modern Warfare 2. I don't know the genealogy, but yeah, it is not re-release, right? It is a new game called Modern Warfare 2.
And it just came out, or it has been out for a while?
The beta just happened last weekend. It's not quite out yet.
I do remember hearing that the new Warzone is like amazing. People on Twitter said the new Warzone map is the shit or something.
Okay. I did not tip my toes in Warzone. Like Warzone 2.0 is a thing. This is like the thing about Warzone. This is interesting, like from a meta, it's kind of like a meta, like price model perspective. Warzone is free, but it is hard to level up your weapons. Because the Warzone doesn't use a traditional PUBG system where like you pick up stuff off the ground, or you can, but there's like certain sets of blueprints. The more common thing, like the kind of like the base objective of any Warzone game is you call on a crate, or you find a crate, or you pick up a crate, and you pull out one of your nicely customized loadouts, right? The thing that's weird about Warzone is that you can't really level, if you're playing just Warzone, it's very hard to kind of like level up your weapons because you can't really control what you're playing with. And so the kind of dynamic is that you buy the game and then you play like normal multiplayer matches to level up your weapons, and that like helps you fill out your Warzone drops. Which I have had someone, I think, as friend of the cast X, I think somewhat facetiously called it pay to win. Because like you have to basically buy the actual game in order to level up the weapons in a way that's like not super roundabout. And I don't know if I'd call that pay to win, but it is kind of like it's an interesting question, right? Because like you could play.
Okay, so this interacts with another question that I think is sort of interesting, which is how fair is it to ask one type of player to play another type of content? And I've defended this in the past. I'm thinking WoW terms, right? I've defended this in the past because raiders, right? Like let's say you play WoW because you like raiding, or you like Mythic Plus, your PvP or whatever, right? There are mechanics that WoW has that like you have to play the story basically, right? Like in 9.2, for instance, in order to get the double legendary belt, you have to play through the Zereth Mortis campaign all the way through, right? So you are essentially taking these like raiding players and funneling them through sort of this alternate game mode, the narrative game mode for WoW, right? Which is not the thing that they're interested in, not the thing that they like play the game for, in order to get the reward that they want, that they can take back to raiding. And the question is that a fair thing to do? And in the past on the podcast, I have said yes, and for the simple reason of people also want the World of Warcraft to be populated by players. They do not want it to be a lobby game, and they want to include reasons for players to go and do open world content so that there are a lot of players out in the open world for you to interact with, right? One of the ways that you do that is you say, hey, if you are a raider, here is some content that takes a couple of hours to get, but it's pretty trivial, pretty trivially easy to do so. Come hang out with, It's like your mom telling telling your older brother that they have to go hang out with their younger brother for an hour, or whatever, something kind of along those sorts of lines. And I think it's a little weird, that the game is sort of asking a Warzone player to go play deathmatch, right? In order to level up the guns, especially in the way that sounds, because it sounds like it's a huge grind. Is that the case? Is
Yeah,
it a
no.
huge grind?
So that this is actually like the appeal of modern Call of Duty, right? That started back with like the original Modern Warfare 2, right? Is like the reason you keep playing is you keep unlocking things, right? Like it's like the beginning of like RPG mechanics and everything, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like what kind of like gives you drive to keep playing is like you keep unlocking stuff, you keep unlocking like new ways to play and like new modifications for your guns and whatnot. Um, and so I agree with you. Like, it's a huge grind, and not only is it a huge grind, but like I said, in war, it is hard to target a particular weapon in Warzone because you have to find it on the ground and then go use it. Right? Like this would be like, in order to like unlock a scope in in Apex, right? Like you would have to go like find the weapon on the ground and then get a number of kills with it, which is like a hard thing to do in the first place, right? Um, and on top of that, like on top of that, you have to go buy the base game in order to effectively do that, right? Like which is like the price point thing, which I don't think is too bad, but it is kind of like, right? Like, um, but yeah, I don't know how to feel about it, especially because like Warzone's like a separate executable, right? Like it is a different tab on the Blizzard launcher. Um,
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah, that is weird. That is really weird. It's also interesting. Like, have you heard about the Overwatch 2 Battle Pass controversy?
the that the heroes are unlockable on the battle pass. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so the brief history of this controversy is that like one dev mentioned on Twitter, just happened like, or like in an interview or something, mentioned that there's one hero that's coming, two heroes actually that are coming immediately, right? You've got Sojourn and you've got uh the Junker Queen, who are both sort of just immediately playable, right? But the third hero, that like the third new character in Overwatch, Kiriko, um, is on the battle pass, right? She's about halfway through, like halfway through the battle pass or whatever. And once people heard this, they said this is bullshit because it makes the battle pass mandatory. To which I was a little confused by this. And I was like, okay, what's the logic here? And it turns out that the logic is that Overwatch is a game of picking and counter picking, right? Which is to say that I I'm going to be playing my hero, right? And if I have a good opportunity to counterpick the enemy team, I am going to swap to a different hero to do that, basically, right? Um, and not having access to every hero in the game for this, for that reason, is bad because it means that you aren't going to have the option to counterpick something, but someone else might have the option to counterpick you, right? If I am a battle pass player who has bought the battle pass and leveled it up faster, Kiriko is free, by the way. But if I'm a battle pass player who has bought the battle pass and leveled it up faster than you on the battle pass, I have this gameplay option that you do not have, and therefore I win. Blizzard has since defended their decision, which I sort of didn't expect. I thought they were going to cave. They have defended their decision by saying the argument that I made on this podcast like 2 or 3 weeks ago when this controversy first broke, which is that realistically nobody really plays Overwatch that way, right? Like the way that you play Overwatch is you have a couple of characters who you are good at, and if you get really hard counterpicked, you swap to another one of your mains, right? I am good at Soldier 76, I'm good at Reaper, I'm good at Pharah. If I'm playing Pharah and somebody counterpicks Pharah, I'll swap to Soldier, right? Or if somebody counterpicks Soldier, I'll swap to Reaper, right? Like that kind of a thing. Very rarely am I going to counterpick into a hero I don't play in order to get, like in order to like beat the enemy team, right? It's not like I see the enemy team has X, Y, and Z, and I play, some hero that's not on my mains list in order to go counter them. That's the first argument that Blizzard made. And the second argument that Blizzard made, which is very different, is heroes are the most exciting content in Overwatch. and they want people to have something exciting to build towards, right? There is a good reason to level up the battle pass because there's a reward that I care about on the battle pass, right? And it's just like we've talked so much about battle passes recently, and I don't know where my thoughts fall on something like this, where it's like, is it fair to sort of withhold something in a way, right? To put it on the battle pass just to give you a good reason to do the battle pass. Does that feel bad? Yes, but also I don't know. Like it's just like it's a complicated question.
Yeah, no, I agree. Um, I don't know how I feel about that. Um, I don't also don't really play Overwatch, but so I don't know. It feels interesting because like it is a competitive game, right?
Yeah.
Like Apex, has they're not on the battle pass, but it has like the characters that are locked, but like it's not so much counter. It's not a counter picking game, right? Um, and like the other comparison maybe be League of Legends, which has I think it just has enough legends that like characters don't really counter pick each other. They counter pick like large swaths of they counter pick archetypes essentially.
You also
Um,
can't switch, right?
yeah,
You are
yeah,
locked in from the beginning of the game, whereas in
right,
Overwatch, hero swapping is like a mechanic that you can engage with.
right. Also, I think part of it is that like the hero pool is smaller in Overwatch. Um, and like I think there's also this kind of thought that like newer stuff tends to be like overtuned. Right? Like this happens all the time in like fighting games. It's like, oh, DLC player means that you're bad because you're picking the broken character or whatever, which is like a scrubby thing to say, but like I think there is like some sense that like this happens like maybe not on purpose, but it's like either you're overtuning it to make like the conspiracy is that they're overtuned so that like people will buy the DLC, but like sometimes it's just because like the mechanics are unique and it interacted in a way that the devs didn't anticipate or whatever, right? I think you
Yep.
also see like undertuned characters happen this way as well, which makes me think generally it's not a conspiracy, just kind of like it's hard to anticipate everything. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's I don't know how I feel about it. My instinct is to say that like it's not a huge deal, but like I get why people are aggravated. Um, I don't know. I don't have any deeper thoughts than that.
Okay.
Um,
Something else I wanted to talk about, something else I wanted to bring up, maybe rant about a little bit is the new indie game publishing label called Big Mode Games, which was announced by Donkey, video game Donkey, the famous YouTuber last week. Big Mode Games is his indie game publishing label that he announced via his YouTube channel, with a 5-minute video, sort of that's a spirited sales pitch for essentially how much he cares about games and how much he wants to bring, great games to as many people as possible. This got resoundingly dunked on Twitter. I got in a little bit on, so the way that I described this was cringe, because the confidence of Donkey's video paired with the cluelessness displayed by that video was eye-opening to me. And I don't know what else to do besides talk about it on my podcast that no one fucking listens to. Um anyway, you've seen this. So you've seen the news, but you have not seen the video. Is that right?
yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
Okay, so to explain the thing that makes it so cringe, like, okay, the thing that I said was talking about ContraPoints. ContraPoints made a whole like 2-hour YouTube video about cringe, and part of what she's doing in that video is talking about like what is cringe? Why is cringe a thing? And the thing that makes cringe happen is you have the pairing of like unending confidence with also like naivety or cluelessness, right? It is someone like the definition of cringe is someone who goes on American Idol and they say that they sound like Freddie Mercury, and then they sing their song and they sound like an ostrich that is giving birth. You know what I mean? It's just like, how on earth do you say that you sound like one of the best like rock singers of all time, right? and then also sound like this. Do you not hear yourself? This is cringeworthy. This is what cringe is. And the thing that makes Donkey's video so cringy is he has this assertion, which is that the dedication of his channel is to kind of throw shameless corporate cash grabs into the trash, right? And seek out and uplift the truly great like gems of indie games that, you know, he thinks his audience ought to be aware of. Now, Mango, I want to just here's a list of some of the games that Donkey thinks he has lifted up, that he has brought to his channel, right? Because he wants to help the best games succeed. Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Spelunky, Hades. We've got Undertale in there. You know, Rocket League, big one. And it's just like he's listing off like Inscription. He's just listing off a bunch of indie games that, to be fair, are great indie games, right? No one is going to walk into this. I haven't even played it. Nobody's going to walk into this and say that Hades is not a great indie game, right? But
They're like
if
indie darlings, right? Like,
yeah, yeah, and it is like it part of this is that I work in indies.
Ori is published by Microsoft,
right? I know. That's what fucking destroys me. Rocket League is owned by Epic. You know, like, you know, oh my god. And like, first of all, most of these games have publishers. Second of all, the degree to which some of these games are indies is sort of like a question. I wouldn't even say Rocket League is an indie game at this point. Like, maybe in its very first days, sure, but it's like,
to be very fair, it was a while before they got acquired by Epic, right? Like, they're like,
sure,
like they were a phenomenon in their own right before it turned around, right? But yes.
And the thing that's crazy about this, and I know that this is because I work in indie games. I have spent the last 3 years working at an indie game publisher, right? Right now, I'm a marketing lead at an indie game publisher. I've shipped a dozen games, right, for this, you know, like for this company. So I know what I'm talking about a little bit. The thing that does not define an indie game publisher is the home runs, if this makes sense, right? Indie game publishing is not about home runs. I feel like I'm playing Moneyball, right? Or like I'm watching Moneyball right now. It is not about the guy, like the game that gets up to bat and knocks it out of the park, because those indie, like, there is one or two of those a year, maybe. You know what I mean? And you've got dozens of indie game publishers, you've got hundreds of indie game developers, right? Like, you are not going to build a successful publishing company if you are saying, I'm going to bring the next great indie game like Undertale to you. It's like, no, you can't fucking promise that. Every game that anyone ever signs has the hope to be the home run, but the reason that an indie game publisher is successful is because they're base hits, right? You know, because like Donkey never fucking played Grime, right? He doesn't know what Grime is, but Grime is a very successful title because, you know, it's a Souls-like Metroidvania. It appealed to that audience in a reasonable way. It was a relatively cheap, like, this is the thing. Indie games are low overhead, right? Because you're the development team is like 5 people, right? You don't have to put millions of dollars into that, right? Which means that you don't have to sell millions of copies, right? An indie game of yours can sell for 50,000 copies, and that can be a huge profit win for you, even if it isn't necessarily like a gigantic, insane Hollow Knight windfall, right? Like, Hollow Knight has probably made 20-30 million dollars or something because of just like the insane amount of sales that game has generated, with the fact that it was developed by a very small Australian company or whatever, right? You don't have to live in that world. And if you're an indie game publishing company, you don't live or die by like comparing your games to Undertale. If any indie game publisher had the option to publish Hades, they would have. But the point is, Hades was made by a developer that had this proven track record, that had a gazillion dollars because Bastion sold like crazy, right? All of these other super giant games were selling like crazy, and they could put the time and attention in to like make that thing like go insanely like hardcore platinum, right? The thing that describes a good indie game publisher is their ability to like live with those base hits. And if you were a YouTuber who was in fact dedicated to bringing these indie games to your audience, right? To uplifting the truly great indie games, you would not be choosing the super gigantic smash hit indies that everyone knows about and everyone is playing on all of their channels, right? You did not introduce Undertale to fucking anybody because everybody was playing Undertale. It was this huge phenomenon. We all knew about Undertale, right? If you're a YouTuber who cares about indie games, you're going to be finding stuff that no one is playing, that no one is talking about, and saying, "Hey, I saw this demo in Steam Next Fest and it's something special." And it's not even like there aren't YouTubers who do that. I know that there are YouTubers who do that because part of my job is finding them and getting them our titles so that they can show their audience and go, "Hey, you know what? Absolute Tactics is a really classic, tactics RPG experience. If you're really just hankering for a good old fashioned, you know, tactics RPG that doesn't hold your hand, that's actually pretty difficult in places, right? That asks you to make complex decisions about movement and placing throughout the game world or whatever, you should try out Absolute Tactics." I have plenty of YouTubers who were willing to say that about Absolute Tactics. Donkey wasn't, because he doesn't play games like that, right? Like, because he doesn't actually care about indie games on that sort of level. And it's just like, oh, I don't know why this is like put such a like this has been stuck in my craw for days.
Hey, no, that makes perfect sense.
It's like, it's like being, imagine being a film YouTuber, right? Being a film YouTuber and saying, "I'm making a production company, okay? I'm making a production company and we're gonna make the best movies out there. Movies like The Avengers, movies like Captain America, movies like Star Wars." It's just like, no, of course you're not going to do those things. You're not going to do those things. That's not how this works. That's like,
Yeah, I mean,
anyway.
and I don't mean to. I don't want to denigrate small publishers, but like truly great games don't need the publisher as much because they kind of like stand on.
True.
Yeah, they stand on their own feet, right? Like, and like again, this is not to denigrate any of the titles over at Aquapara, but like a game with more niche appeal, something like a Grime, right? Like a Grime is like a Souls Metroidvania, unique in that kind of regard, but like it's like it is like Hollow Knight in that regard, but like it is for people who want something a little bit something extra, right? Like they want something in that genre because they've already played Hollow Knight to death or whatever, right? They've played the giants of the genre, they've played like the mainstream versions of it, and a publisher services those more niche titles and those like less blockbuster titles to an audience that appreciates them, right? And so yes, like like that's the thing, right? Like the blockbuster hits don't need a like at that point all the publisher is doing is like taking a cut and maybe like doing advertising. Like I wonder if there's a title that wouldn't have been like a truly kind of like blockbuster title that wouldn't have been a blockbuster without the publisher. And
Oh, that is, first of all, that is true. And second of all, that is, it is the other aspect that Donkey is insane about, right? Which is that, look, when any of us are signing titles, like, hindsight is 2020, essentially,
right,
right? When any of us are signing titles, we're looking at them for kind of best case scenario, worst case scenarios, right? When I looked at something like a Cardboard Kings, for instance, right? Nowhere in that alpha was most of those games of that game's mechanics. You had a vertical slice to go off of, right? And the challenge for a developer in that scenario, they're going out for publishing, right? They probably are in development. They have an alpha, they have something playable, a demo. And the point of the demo is to simultaneously encapsulate the experience of what playing that game is going to be like, while also suggesting what the rest of that game is going to be like, right? So for instance, and I've done a million of these feedback rounds, by the way. It's very common for me to get a demo and see, oh, I see what this indie game is doing. I'm just gonna use a hypothetical example because I don't want to shit on anybody that's like real, right? Let's say it's a tactics RPG, right? But it's a tactics RPG that has a a little mini game that you play inside of any of your rounds, right? So you select a character and maybe you play a mini game in the vein of like fishing in Stardew Valley, right? Like a little 20-second little mini game. You solve a little puzzle, and your ability to solve the puzzle depends whether or not your attack hits or misses, right? There are a lot of games that are like that, where it is like, oh, here's a familiar thing and here is a little remixed mechanical detail on top of it. And I turn those down. And the reason why is because you figure that mechanic out in 5 fucking seconds, and you're like, if this is all the game is, there's nothing else here, right? You could make this game 20 more hours of content and I wouldn't want to play another instance of it, because the mechanic, like the remixed mechanic, is so simple that it was displayed to me in the demo, and it has nowhere to go, right? You're not showing me the sort of breadth, and that's a tough thing to land, right? That's like a really tough thing to land. Whereas something like Estrella, for instance, had a really spectacular demo, and it's because even though Estrella only had one playable character with one set of like dice that I was able to use in order to do this roguelike experience, and only a couple of enemies, right? Like only a handful of enemies, right? Immediately I could understand, oh, I see how different characters would interact with this world, right? Well, how I could find replayability by adding new enemies who have different abilities that are going to change the way that I'm going to approach this thing. It suggested into the possibility space, right, of the game that it could be, but I only saw that little vertical slice, right? And this is what you get when you're an indie game publisher. You get that vertical slice, and you have to make the decision based on that vertical slice. And also stuff like you get a design document, you get a pitch deck, right? You get some other stuff in there just so that the developer can show you. Maybe they'll take you down in a meeting and they will give you their full hour-long pitch where they talk about, and here's what we're doing next in development, and what kinds of systems we're adding, what kind of features that we're adding. And I guarantee you that it is impossible to tell which games are going to be those smash out breakaway super insane hits based on a vertical slice like that, right? It is just impossible. And the reason I know that it's fucking impossible is because if it were possible, people would be doing it. People would be, we would only sign the good games, right? Like this is what half of the Twitter discourse was like. It was like, oh wow, Donkey really like cracked the code there. All you had to do was sign Undertale. It's like, well, yeah, but like you need to be able to see the possibility space, and then also the developer has to actually execute on the possibility space in order to like get there. And that's so rare. No one can do that. If that existed,
if that was easy enough to do, then the big publishers would be signing the indies because they'd be like guaranteed revenue, right? Like,
and it's like, and there's so many other pieces of that kind of puzzle that are so intricate, and like in that stupid dumbass dipshit announcement video, he didn't explain, like none of that existed basically. Which is not to say I don't think Donkey has bad intentions. I believe him when he says that he cares about games, and I believe him when he says I want to make I want to publish the best games right out there. Sure, okay, fair enough. I'm on board. I'm on board with that. But it's just it's just the naivety of it destroys me. Like,
yep.
it's
I could see it maybe working out in the way that because indie publishers work, like Donkey seems to me like he wants to do indie games like VCs, and so in the venture capital world, right? The way that this works is companies will make a bunch of bets and only expect one to pay off, right? But they want that one to really pay off, right? Like they are in effect looking for the next Undertale, and they don't mind signing 72 hentai puzzler 4 in the process, right? But that's not really the indie publisher model right now, right? It doesn't sound like what Donkey says he wants, but that's the way I can see it working out. Is he just, because he's a successful enough YouTuber that he has enough capital, they can just throw money at these pet projects that he happens to strike gold with one, and that works out and he makes his money back on that. I could see that working, but that's also not what he's claiming. But that's the only way I could see this type of model working out.
I also think that, exposure is huge, right? Yeah. Honestly, look, if I'm an indie developer and I'm thinking about submitting to publishers, I'm submitting to Big Mode Games, obviously, right? Because the chance, what I would not fucking do to have Donkey play Absolute Tactics, right? Holy fuck, I would give my left nut to have Donkey play some of the Akupara games, just because it is so hard to penetrate, like, and get exposure. And this guy has 2 million YouTube subs, right?
Right.
Like, if I could get whoever, PewDiePie, Markiplier, Donkey, to play some of our titles, that's insanely valuable. Insanely valuable, right? And maybe, though, actually, to be fair, not as valuable as you might think, in different sorts of ways. Influencers are weird and crazy, but whatever the case may be, maybe that's the reason, right? Like, you guarantee a certain level of exposure.
Yeah, but like, that's also kind of like, I think people are not dumb, and like, the moment he starts playing the games from his publishing house, people aren't going to take it as like, like an authentic opinion, right? Like,
Yup.
like
Well, because like, this is one of the things that we learned. Organic influencers pay off, right? Like, or if somebody organically picks up your game, that'll convert to sales. If you pay an influencer to play your game, no, never, not once, right? Like, just the moment people sense it is an ad that they are being advertised to, and that the streamer is, being paid for their time, they're, like, they're out of it. And maybe you can get away with it on an exposure level. This is something I've heard before. I don't believe it, but whatever. I've heard agencies say, honestly, well, I won't say who. A friend of the cast has told me on an agency level, that it pays off not in terms of the direct sales, right? It's not like me getting whoever, to play. Like, it's not like me getting Markiplier. Let's say I pay Markiplier to play my game. Is going to get sales because Mark is going to translate sales to his audience, right? Kids who are watching the Markiplier YouTube channel are not going and picking up the game necessarily because they sense that it's an ad. They're not going to do that thing or whatever, right? But getting a huge, like, dynamite YouTuber to play your game, ups your exposure in the algorithm, and like, makes it such that your game becomes a thing that is bigger than itself, where you can generate like powerful organic traffic, such that if you are the type of person who would play, whatever this game is, right? Because the fact that there's a Markiplier video with 2 million views on it, or whatever the number would be, right? It is easy for that game to be put in front of a player who is saying, okay, I want to play a new game on Steam. What is it? Right?
yeah,
That, maybe you could make that argument, right? But I just feel like no one ever in a million years buys a game because of an ad influencer, and that's exactly what's going to happen with Donkey, right? On top of the ethical considerations of just like, like, Donkey essentially reviewing his own games on his own, like, YouTube channel, right? Like, having a weird set of ethics involved,
I mean,
in that.
he can't really review them, right? Like, he can be like, like, this is a game I'm publishing. Like,
Yeah.
like Paradox puts out videos about Victoria, right? But I understand that that's like the developer putting out the video, right? And similarly, Donkey could be like, this is a game I'm publishing and I'm going to play it. But he can't really, and be like, like, I think these features are cool or whatever, but he can't really be like, unless I give it a 10 out of 10, right? Like, he has to be like, this is a game I'm publishing, check it out because I think it's cool, like, and I think it's, a good game, otherwise I wouldn't publish it, I guess. But like, that's like there's a way to be honest about it. It's just like hard, right? Like, and I think he could do it, but like, I also don't know, like, I don't know. I also don't think Donkey's a particularly valuable reviewer. So, maybe that saves it, right? Like,
I also, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I watch a lot of Donkey stuff, obviously. I think he's funny, but I don't know. You said this thing off the cast where, like, when Donkey gets serious, he's not good, and I sort of feel that way. Like,
yeah.
I don't think he's particularly profound or insightful.
When he started doing more serious content, that's when I dropped the channel, because I was like, I don't care. And also, like, he has a tendency, like, this is the thing that personally irks me, is like, when people start to push back at on him on some of his stuff, sometimes he does the kind of like, oh, this was a comedy bit, right? Like, because he mixes the content, like, the big one for this was well, what was like it was like the Shadow of the Colossus people did like the game with like the Griffin.
The Last Guardian?
Yeah, the Last Guardian. Thank you. And he like was like kind of clowning on the game at certain parts, but he was like intentionally playing it bad for like comedic effect. but like it was in the frame of where it could have been like a serious, like a like not serious because it's like a comedy, but like like he was. It might have been played as if he was doing a serious, like identifying this as a serious problem with the game. Um, and like the fact that he mixes that content just like rubs me the wrong way because it's like hard to know when he's doing what. Um, and I don't find that particularly valuable. So, you know,
Donkey is the worst possible person for this, to be honest, says the chat. Donkey is only funny when he's ragging on
Yeah,
shit.
no, that's true, right? Like but that's like that's like the style of comedy, right? Like being positive is generally not funny, and that's fine. But like it was between like like zero punctuation. Even when he likes the game, he has to shit on it because like that's what the format is, right? Like,
Yeah.
and he recognizes that, and he like will say at like the end of his like ranty videos, be like, and I like this game, but I did a bunch of nitpicky stuff because like that's what this format is. Like he did in like the last video he put out, right? And like I don't go to zero punctuation for like an actual evaluation of a game. I go to it because they're funny, right? Like,
He's really good. Donkey voice. Hey, look at this piece of shit I'm producing.
Yeah, right. Like
that's true. That is sort of what he's like. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I also just think that there has not been a great track record of this. Show me a YouTuber who has produced a movie that's good. Like
it, I
Patrick H. Willems, maybe. I haven't even seen Night of the Coconut yet, but I liked a lot of his other stuff, and I think like maybe he's the only one. But like, who the fuck is gonna look at The Thinning from Logan Paul or whatever and say like, oh yeah, because this guy was good at YouTube, he started making movies good. It's
I mean, hey, so like classically, Red Letter Media, who do great content about bad B movies, right? Try to intentionally make a bad B movie, and Space Cop is a failure on both of those metrics, and they're open about that. But like, it's a hard thing to do, right? Like, or like I don't know, with video game producers specifically, the thing that immediately pops in my mind is Kurt Schilling, right? And what was the name of that game?
Oh god, the Kingdoms of Amalur.
Yeah,
right?
Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. Yeah.
Which is a weird game that actually has something of a fan base. Funnily enough, I have a friend who like goes really fucking hard for that game, but like that whole studio is like run into the ground, right? Like he spent $100 million, I think, of Rhode Island's money or something like that. Like
yeah,
he went
it was
to Rhode Island.
there was like a tax incentive that like he basically like wrote it for all it's worth and nothing worked out, and then he like shuttered it. I think they went after him, but I don't remember the details.
And like and there are other YouTubers who have made video games, right? Like the Angry Video Game Nerd made a video game, which I don't want to talk too much about that, obviously. But like it's just like the skills that go into being a critic do not necessarily translate into the skills that go into being a great producer of the thing you are critiquing, right?
Yeah.
And
especially with games, which is like there's a lot of like technical knowledge that like you really don't need in order to make like a criticism.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like we need to do a whole episode on this. People need to do. We're 20 minutes over, right? Like people do like rag on idea guys, right? People will talk about, oh, I'm an ideas guy. It's like, dude, it doesn't exist. Like games, like it just doesn't fucking exist. And game dev Twitter is always getting on people about that. In my professional capacity as a a community manager for an indie game publisher, have had to tell a million people who PM me on Discord, oh, I have a great idea for a game, I just need someone to help me develop it. It's like, buddy, no. I'm like, I'm sorry, right?
That and $1 will get you a pack of gum, right? Like
exactly, right? Like that's just like not interesting. It's like not impressive. You're not showing me the skill set.
This is less common now, but this was for a very long time. Like there was a whole site called like Wharton student seeks programmer, right? Or Wharton MBA seeks programmer, right? It's like this happens outside of the video game world too, right? Like as somebody who's a technical person outside the video game world, it's like I have this great idea, I just need you to go build it. It's like okay, thanks, right? Like
yeah. I mean, because especially, and this is the thing that maybe people don't necessarily see is how much indies, like how much indie games are a place for people to, it's sort of a release valve, I want to say, for like the AAA games industry, right? Like Monster Texas is a great example of this. Jason works on he's worked at Gearbox for the 15 years. He still works there, right? And he basically made this whole game in his free time. And you're gonna tell me, right? Like, let's say I'm a hypothetical idea guy, right? You're gonna tell me that you're going to come at me, even if you come out of, like, let's say you come out of school, you have a prototype, you have some sort of vertical slice that you can actually make a pitch with, right? Which not every game school, like, that's not a guarantee, right? Even if you could make me that pitch, right? Why on earth would I ever take your game over Absolute Tactics, which is developed by a guy who has 15 years game development experience under his belt? You know, and like, it's basically every pitch I ever see for indie game development is either I am a mobile game developer who wants to break into, like PCs or console or something, right? Like, I want to get out of the mobile game space and I want to start making games for, traditional game consoles and PC, right? Or I'm a AAA developer who is, like, getting away from whatever the stress of corporate whatever, right? And I'm making my own thing with like two of my friends, and we just left Square Enix after putting 10 years there, right? And we're making a game again. It's like, when every single pitch that most game publishers are going to be seeing is a pitch like that, it's just like, you're never going to get anywhere with the I'm an ideas
Oh
guy
yeah,
kind of thing.
and like I don't know how much you see this or like how much they go out to publishers, but I definitely know a lot of people that are like, I work in big tech and this game is like my fun side project, right? And like, even if I never publish it, it's like, it's a thing I will build in my spare time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That sort of thing happens all the time, right? And so, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that was a good end of show rant, but I do think we should wrap it up. If you'd like to email us any of the things that we talked about, or email us your thoughts on any of the things we talked about on this podcast, email us games@gmail.com or podcast@games.com. You can follow us on twitch.tv/games where these go out live. We've got a YouTube, we've got a Patreon, we've got a SoundCloud. We're on every podcast distribution service. Please leave us a rating, I guess, especially on iTunes is the big one. Follow us on Twitch, I guess. But that's everything I have. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
Is there anything I'm looking to promote?
Go play Absolute Tactics, I guess.
Yeah, go play Absolute Tactics. Absolute Tactics has been out for 2 weeks. We've actually been patching the game pretty vigorously, which is nice. One of the other things that's tough about indie games is you like the amount of people that see a game is just so small compared to what you get on launch. So we've gotten a bunch of people who've said we want all of this level of feedback, and now we're delivering on that stuff, which is kind of neat and interesting. So yeah, that's my recommendation. Go play Absolute Tactics.
Yeah, I mean, also just as a general public service announcement, Action Button put out a new review yesterday, which I haven't watched yet because
talk about that. Fuck, I was going to talk about it.
Did you watch it?
I watched the first 4 hours of it.
All right.
There's a lot in there that I want to talk about. Oh, my God.
We'll talk about it next week. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.